people. We're here. It's late, but we're not going to let that bother us because we're back for another official podcast here on the Talkin TV channel. I'm the movie nerd. That's the TV nerd. And Chris, you're probably wondering why I'm talking so slowly.
It's new. It's definitely, I'm a little concerned.
Well, see, I like to do this thing where I off-put the audience and I like to reel them in and show, oh, no, I am capable of, not just being a super loud, energetic, chatterbox. I can actually be somewhat smooth and suave when I want to be.
This is being suave?
I don't know about suave, but it's definitely, quieter than I'm used to,
that's what you said it. To me, it just seems like you're tired. Are you tired, Dom?
No, I'm not tired. I would say I'm just, like I said, I'm relaxed is what I am. I'm calm. I'm chilled out, and I'm enjoying this Tuesday night, which is crazy considering that it's a Tuesday and those days are out to get me usually. So, Chris, how was your Tuesday?
It was good. It was, I guess, a little up and down in the sense that, I work at a golf course and it was raining a lot, but it didn't rain enough to where we called it for weather, and I got to go home early, but it kept staying on the verge of, hey, any second we could go home. So it was a bit of a tease, a bit of a tugging on the heartstrings.
I hate those.
Movie magic
I hate those. I'm just gonna let it be known right now. Whenever that happened, I remember I used to lifeguard back in the day, and it was the same exact situation. People, these are the lives of up and coming podcasters. We have to work day jobs, and this is stuff that we have to do in order to do the stuff that we love.
And you know what? We're gonna have some good fodder for the hopeful end of the journey, like Joe Rogan's always talking about his struggles out in Boston being a construction worker. You're at a wine store, mine's at a golf course.
Exactly. Hey, it happens. We all gotta get there sometime. Exactly. But no, so Chris, but I should admit that the real reason why I'm so super calm right now is because I am beyond excited because. Okay, so I'm going to be upfront and honest with our audience. This is not exactly the episode that I wanted to do, but the point being is that because we still got to do an episode in this vein, I am super excited for a lot of different reasons. So if you guys have been keeping up with the channel recently, and also real quick before I get into explaining what it is, also be sure if you're on this video, make sure, if possible, leave a like and a subscribe. It would be greatly appreciated.
Thank you.
But so this past month for our watch-alongs that we've been doing, we were doing a little bit of some anniversary watch-alongs. Like I said, it's just the stars aligned. We were able to do 2 watch-alongs back-to-back the week in a row. Jurassic World, we hit its 5-year anniversary. Toy Story 3, we hit its 10-year anniversary. And I did this thing where I'm like, yo, Chris, what if we just did a top 10 list to kind of wrap up the month where we just did a top 10 list of our anniversaries. We did a decent amount of top 10 lists at the beginning of this year. We had a lot of fun with that. I've been doing a lot of solo top 10s in the channel. So I'm like, screw it. It's kind of a light week. There's not really a lot going on movie-wise. Let's do it. And I originally wanted to do movies that were turning 10 this year. And I sent my list to Chris. And Chris is like, yeah, I've seen 3 of those movies. I'm like, okay, so we're not going to do that one. And then I sent him my other list of okay, well, what if we did movies that are turning 5 from 2015? And he was like, okay, I've seen some more movies from that list. I can do that. And so here we are, people. We are here. I'm going to break down the official title of it. As it says in the title, man, we're this old already. This is the top 10 movies that are turning 5 this year, the top 10 movies from 2015. Now, Chris, I don't know how special 2015 is for a year for you, but I know for me, it was a very special year because it was the year that I graduated high school. It was the year that I was finally starting to get in my own. It was the year I started driving. I'm like, yeah, so this is what freedom feels like before I discovered all the trials and tribulations that unfortunately come with said freedom. And my whole thing that I was thinking was that, oh man, I can finally drive on my own. I can finally see movies on my own. And so that was the beginning of this epic odyssey that I've been on these last few years of just going to the movie theater every single weekend to see whatever the new movie was. And for the most part, before 2016 came around and a majority of them started sucking, they were all great. Even the bad movies that I saw in 2015, in hindsight, they were just enjoyable to watch in theaters. They were great theater-going experiences. So needless to say, this year was a very, very special year for me.
Yeah, 2015 for me is actually a year that I have a few memorable theater-going experiences as well. But before I did this show and we started going to the theaters all the time. So these are like some of like the special movie theater memories. Not that like when you and I go to the theaters every weekend when we get back to normal. Not that that's not special, but like it's really before I fell in love with movies when I was just a TV guy. And I said, okay, movies are cool. There's a few that are very special to me, but the magic wasn't there for me like it is now,
Wasn't
certainly. And
quite there yet.
so yeah, I mean Jurassic World and Force Awakens. I went opening night both nights. We drove out to a really nice theater in another state, which isn't too far from where we live. I won't divulge specificities.
Specifics. Just say specifics.
I was trying to use that tense, but you're right. I won't divulge specifics just in case this channel is growing in a sense of internet stalkers. No, I'm just kidding. But
Not yet.
Not yet. But hey, maybe one day.
Who knows? Hopefully, that's the goal.
Apparently, people say that that's when you really make it. If you listen to like some of the guys that Rogan has on
it's a double-edged sword, but we don't need to get into that now.
But yeah, no. So basically, it's funny. Like this year is very underwhelming to me as far as top 10 movies go. It felt like scraping not the bottom of a barrel, but to say that these are like gonna be on my top 10 of the past decade, maybe one, maybe. Weak year for me overall, but it's funny because I wasn't the biggest theater guy, but somehow 2015 brought me to the theaters.
Yeah, because the other thing, because the other thing too, and that I can just point out is obviously in hindsight is the fact that we met 1 year later in 2016, and I know when you met me, that was like was a big pusher for you to like start watching some movies. You caught up on some movies, you watched some good ones
for sure. No, and your quest to see everything even took me a little bit out of my loop of having to rewatch the same TV shows over and over again, which, I love Lost. I love The Office. I love, shows like How I Met Your Mother and stuff. But there's only so many times you got to check out new stuff too, So 2015 was when I guess I was dabbling into some new things, but then I met you and it's been theater going ever since. But so it's just funny that like this year is a weak year for me as far as the movies that I have in my top 10. Not saying they're not deserving, but it's just funny that like I wasn't a movie guy yet. 2015 brought me to the movies a bunch, yet these movies are weak now that I'm here. Someone who's seen quite a lot more movies than I did back then. And it's just a weird dichotomy. So I'm excited to see where this one takes me personally.
Absolutely.
That's what I've been trying to say for the past 4 minutes.
I'm excited to just like see what your choices are because like I said, I think I've got some interesting choices. I think you've got some interesting choices. And this is going to be a fun one to say the least. So people, before we dive in, I guess like Chris, do you have any honorable mentions?
Honorable mentions? No.
Yeah.
Like I said,
I got a few. I'll run through them real quick. I'm not going to divulge into it. It's just like I said, this is a special year for me. This is a year like I literally watched like every single movie that I could. So I've got like a decent amount of.
You saw this whole year. I know you kind of like keep track of that.
55. As of right now, it's still 55 from that year, which is like pales in comparison to future years. But yeah, I saw 55 movies that year.
This is still a well-curated list, though, that we're about to get from you.
I saw a lot of movies. So starting at the bottom. So yeah, I would throw these next couple of movies on. So Avengers Age of Ultron, We Are Your Friends, Mission Impossible Rogue Nation, The Man from U.N.C.L.E., The Lady in the Van, Grandma, The Revenant, Black Mass, Spotlight, The End of the Tour, Tangerine, Mad Max Fury Road, Sleeping with Other People, Dope, Me, Earl, and the Dying Girl, and What We Do in the Shadows are all movies that I would easily consider honorable mentions. If I could go even further, I would, but like that like already puts me like almost halfway through the list. So I'm not going to go that far. But yeah, I saw a lot of movies in 2015.
I feel that. No, that's good, man. I mean, this is your bag, and you were certainly full steam into it at this point in time. So
most definitely. So
if
we want to get this thing started.
10 TV shows of 2015. That's another.
That's a whole different story. I've still got a few good ones from there, but the thing is that was also when I was like watching some obscure TV like shows that you probably haven't even heard of. Like, I mean, I got Silicon Valley on there, but like I got the first season of Daredevil. I got Fargo.
Yeah, it's got to be first seasons. That's the thing. It's
only see, I don't do that. I don't do only debut seasons. I don't do only debut seasons.
I think that's how you get a true top 10.
I disagree, but that's a list for another day. That's a list for another day. But
that being said, I can also see the sentiment on that side of the table. But hey, like you said, Dom, that's not what we're here to talk about.
Exactly.
Tonight. So, Dom, what are we here? Just to reiterate, what are we?
Our top 10 favorite movies that are turning 5. Our favorite movies from 2015.
That's right.
So if you guys are unfamiliar with the format, we've done this a little bit before, but just in case you guys didn't get a chance to watch any of our previous episodes that we did, basically we got a top 10 list, but we basically just go back and forth. Whoever starts, they do their 10, then the other person does their 10, and so on and so forth until we get down to our number one choices. So, and like I said, I'm going to be very interested because I think, again, even though I don't know what a few of your choices are, I think I know what like a couple of your choices are. Like I said, I'm interested to see them because I already know it's going to be a crazy list from you, Chris. So, Chris, if I want to be completely
honest, because it's
honesty,
you're the movie nerd, I'm the TV nerd. So let me just say that I saw just enough to decide what would make it and what wouldn't, but just enough to have that conversation with myself. It's not like I saw 55 movies, people. Now, I don't feel the need to divulge the number I saw, but it's not a lot. So when you see some of these movies on here that we may or may not have talked about on the channel before, just understand, hey, he's the TV nerd. So when we jump into his bag, you'll be wowed by the knowledge.
Oh, wow. And so you have to defend yourself, man. Don't defend yourself. Just embrace your choices.
Well, I'm happy with my choices, but I just, I've seen just enough to get this done. So if people are like, "Oh, that fucking movie," like I said, this ain't the best year for me.
I'm looking forward to it, man. And look, all I know is that
most films are boring to me.
All I'm gonna say is that this man is the only man that I know that put Detective Pikachu in his top 10 movies of last year. This man gets all the respect in my book, as far as I'm concerned, because no other person had the bravery, and I'm going to use that word, bravery, to put that movie in their top 10. So, yeah.
It's a fine film, and keep an eye out for an upcoming segment of our Strength of the Screenplay. With that being said, Dom, should we jump into this?
Let's jump into it. So, honestly, here's the thing. I would go first normally, but I really want to see your choices first, so I kind of want you to go first and kick it off.
Sure, that's fine. Since this is kind of your thing, I don't mind not going second. So I'll go.
I see what you did there.
So with that being said, hey man, I hope I spelled it right. I'm really tired, but at number 10, of 2015.
I can't wait. Let's see it. Let's see it.
Please.
Oh boy. Oh boy. What's it gonna be? What's it gonna be? Yes. Jurassic World. Let's go.
I can keep this one quick. We did a 3-hour watch along on it.
Yeah. So I'm still glad that you called a watch along. That was a roast fest. Let's be honest here.
Yeah, and that's very much so. I think the best way to start off the way I feel about this year of movies based off what I saw. Not very memorable, but every time you watch it, it's a good time. And you're always having a good time with friends. This is one of those movies I was talking about with my theater going experiences, where it's like ironic because week here wasn't the biggest movie guy, yet I went to the theaters for 2 very memorable nights. Well, 2015 to me was the year of the reboot, and Jurassic World was one of those reboots that I was so excited for and then so let down about at the diner afterwards, as we did back then. So
because again, it's a movie where it's a movie that's awesome to watch, and then you think about it for 3 seconds and you're like, oh, that thing sucks.
Exactly. This movie made for a very fun car ride there, a very quiet car ride home, and a very, very, very tired and all over the place, just like the movie diner experience afterwards. And I mean, what more do I have to say about it? To talk about the filming, the cinematography, the
visuals are good.
Yeah, we've done that though. So Jurassic World comes in at number 10. For me, and that's just the way it is.
That's awesome. I love that. And here's I knew going in that this movie was going to be on your top 10 list, but I didn't know where it was going to fall. But it actually makes me really excited to see what the rest of your choices are. So if we're getting into my choices now, my number 10 is funny because I'm looking at my letterbox and I kind of did like a last minute rearrangement just in terms of like how these movies rank. Because these movies are still all my favorites from this year, but they definitely rearranged and shifted around a lot. But my number 10 choice, again, it helps that I'm wearing the shirt. He's my number 1 favorite filmmaker of all time. And even though this movie is considered amongst one of his weaker efforts, to me, this was still an absolute marvel of a watch. Like the minute that I started watching, when I first watched Pulp Fiction and Django Unchained back in early high school, I knew that this guy was a different kind of a filmmaker. And because my number 10 is Quentin Tarantino's The Hateful Eight. Really good movie, really different kind of a movie, very confined setting. The majority of the movie is, again, it's what Tarantino specializes in. It's people talking. And this movie still has a special place in my heart because I remember when I watched this movie, even though it was a situation of where, yeah, it's just like people talking for like 3 hours. Like, what is the point of this? Like, just I remember we talked about this. This is like our second ever podcast episode that we did back on our old podcast at Duchess, the Movie Nerd podcast. Yeah,
wow.
yeah. I wasn't sure if you were gonna remember that or not. And I just remember
I did not.
You told me. I remember this was something you told me specifically where you were like, all Tarantino does is just write this dialogue for these characters, but like I'm always enraptured by it. And you're right. Like, there's something about the way that Tarantino writes his characters. I don't know whether it's just the fact that he pulls from like every single obscure movie that he's watched when he was a kid, or if it's just the fact that like he knows how to get these good performances from these actors. But yeah, you throw Samuel L. Jackson, Kurt Russell, Jennifer Jason Leigh, Walton Goggins, Tim Roth, Mike Madsen, Demi Moore, and Bruce Dern into a cabin together in the middle of a blizzard in the Civil War. You're going to get some interesting meetups and some interesting conversations and some very more interesting conflicts that go on. And like, as it's just one of those situations where you feel like you're stuck in the cabin with them and you kind of just like get to know more and more about them. And it's at the point where you realize that you're like the halfway point that you're like, okay, well, I got to finish it now. And it's like, I will say that again, I don't think it's one of Tarantino's best. I think structurally it could have been structured a little bit better, but as far as just like another like shining example in his filmography, like it was great. And it really sucks that because again, 2015 was the year of the reboot, so Tarantino really didn't have a chance to stand up. Plus, it didn't help that this movie came out like only a week before The Force Awakens, so there was no way that it was going to get the recognition that it deserved. I think it only got like 2 Oscar nominations, which one of which it won very, very rightfully so, with that being supporting actress for Jennifer Jason Leigh and original score for Ennio Morricone, which is great. Like, another fun little tidbit is that Ennio Morricone actually used this unused score from The Thing for this movie, and oh man, I'm so glad that decision happened. But yeah, it's a great movie. It's an awesome movie. I love Tarantino. He's still my favorite filmmaker. And even though this isn't one of my favorite of his movies, it's still one of the best movies that I saw from that year, The Hateful Eight.
Dude, I completely forgot about that podcast.
Yeah, now, man.
Our original show was airing in 2016.
2016. No, I think we started, I want to say we started New Year's of 2017 was when we made the Rogue One podcast. It was like right after we saw it, and then you said, "Oh, I just saw The Hateful Eight. You want to do The Hateful Eight?" I'm like, "Sure."
I was gonna ask, what was like the impetus to like do this movie that was 2 years old?
It was only a year old by that point.
It was just like, "Oh, let's do it."
You literally just said, "Oh, hey, let's like I just watched The Hateful Eight. This movie's super cool. You want to do a podcast?" And I'm like, "Sure, I love this movie. I absolutely talk about Tarantino." Throwing it back, man. Throwing it back. Who cares? That's what made for it being so good back in the day.
Yeah. I'm gonna have to go. Is that still up on your channel?
It's on my YouTube channel. Every podcast episode that we did is still on the Movie Nerd Reviews channel.
I'm gonna have to go and check that out.
Oh man, it's such a time capsule, man.
That is funny. That is, never take those down, Dom.
No, never. I'm not taking down a single thing from my old channel.
Please, thank you. All right, so
on to your number 9.
Moving on to our number 9 picks. And for me, we are going with the second film that brought me to the theaters that year for a very memorable theater-going experience in the freezing cold of December. And it was a good time. But the film sucked, and the film was terrible, and the film was god-awful. And I would love to see any of these actors stand on their own going forward, because I think it's going to be tough for them, because they're going to have the scorn of being in this movie on their resume. But they must press on, because that's just what they have to do to make a living. And I wish the best of them, but it's going to be tough.
Of course, you goddamn troll.
Star Wars,
you goddamn troll. Oh my God.
This movie is the epitome of the word reboot. There is no originality to it. It is pretty much just Rogue One with better CG, well, actual CG, and with just a new planet and slightly different costumes and slightly different people.
When you say Rogue One, do you mean A New Hope?
A New Hope. Yeah. Sorry. Rogue One actually was good. So I, liked that film a lot, as you can tell by our Star Wars watch along that we've done. But no, in all seriousness, all trolling out of the way, this film is pathetic. I did enjoy it in the moment, though, and I remember really liking it and really thinking there was hope for Star Wars. So that's why I had to put it on this list, because I kind of looked at this list as a little bit of a time capsule. So I was like, okay, if we're going back to 2015 and I'm revisiting this time of my life, I was very much so super excited about Star Wars. I went out and I bought a Star Wars box set with all these special extra scenes and this documentary about the process from George Lucas, just to get preparation to watch them all again on Blu-ray before I went and saw this film, because I was that excited and I really thought this film lived up to expectations. I went and saw it 3 times in theaters after that. not having a theater pass, not having a free ticket, just going because I was like, I need to see this again. Star Wars is back. Let's go. Each time hating BB-8 more and more, but still loving.
Remember, you did not like BB-8 at
Yeah.
all. You made that very clear to me when we first met.
Still loving the movie as a whole. And so, yeah, I can look back on it and realizing that it is the hot steaming piece of a dumpster fire that it is. But 2015 me, there was hope, and rebellions are built on hope. And so that's why I had to put the Force Awakens in my list. And that's just that, because like I said,
man.
for me, 2015, not the strongest year as far as how many movies I've seen, but also out of how I liked the few movies I did see. So that's just where we're at tonight, Dom.
Chris, it never ceases to amaze me how far your trolling and your hatred of Disney will go. But don't worry, I'll cover that in a couple of choices. It's true, I did, and I stand by it. But because, like I said, my thoughts on it are what they are. So we're moving on to my number 9 now. And my number 9 is interesting because to me, this was the first movie that I saw from this year that really showed me, oh, wow, so going to the theater and watching movies could be really freaking cool. Because everyone gives Deadpool credit for putting February on the map in terms of like debut movies. But for me, this came a year before with the kind of the spiritual successor, I'm going to call it, to Kingsman. This was Matthew Vaughn back tackling what he did and giving us not only like one of the best like new modern day spy movies, but also giving us like a better James Bond parody than Austin Powers. And that is the first Kingsman movie, Kingsman: The Secret Service. Oh man, this movie's a goddamn blast. I love this freaking movie. From the minute that it opens with the soundtrack, with they're playing the Money Ain't For Nothing song. You know what song I'm talking about. I'm terrible with song names. And immediately off the bat, yeah, that. This movie automatically establishes that it is a parody, but the movie also does such a great job of crafting its own brilliant, unique identity. It's another adaptation of a Mark Millar comic, and there is just so much heart and so much hilarity that is thrown into this movie. Like, I remember when I watched this, I was with my uncle and a couple of friends. And like every single joke, I'm like completely landed. And like it was one of those situations where, yeah, there were a ton of references in it, but they all felt like they came from a place of love. And like you could tell that they were legitimately poking fun at the action tropes and genres while also like kind of spinning off their own mythos. You know, it was one of those things. It was kind of at a time like before things became like really obnoxious and the references became like really, really annoying. But like this movie kind of came out at like the perfect time span. It had a great cast. It introduced me to Taron Egerton as an actor before he kind of became overrated. But for this movie, he was really good. It introduced me to the fact that, oh, Colin Firth could actually be like a badass action star. Incredible British supporting cast. I think this was like the first like mainstream British movie that I saw. The action is great and off the hook. The visual effects are great. It's Matthew Vaughn directing, and Matthew Vaughn knows how to direct violence that is super violent, but also feels like pulpy. Like there's a reason why Kick-Ass stands out in so many people's minds. Not to mention the fact of like, yeah, I love Samuel L. Jackson in The Hateful Eight, and Samuel L. Jackson was in, I think it was like, I want to say it was like 4 big movies in 2015, but his performance
Didn't Samuel
here.
Jackson see the first one and he was like, I love this so much. Like, can I be in the
This
oh no.
was the first one.
This was the first one?
This was the
a
first
film
one.
there was a film that he did that with though, like one of these kind of like.
Sure, but it wasn't this one because
Yeah, okay, no, that's fine.
He got because Sam Jackson's performance in this movie as the villain Richmond Valentine. I'm sorry, but every single Bond villain can go F themselves because Samuel L. Jackson's Richmond Valentine is one of the greatest spy villains I've ever seen. Because this is a guy who has a lisp, abhors violence, but is a tech genius. And just his reaction to everything was so good. Like, he comes in after his henchwoman. This is also the movie that introduced me to Sophia Boutella, also, by the way. And after his henchwoman was like sliced and diced all of these men, and he comes in and he's talking to Mark Hamill, and he's like, oh my God, I am so sorry about that. You know, like, I can't stand the sight of violence. And I'm just like, yes, like, absolutely, like, this is my new super spy villain. This movie is absolutely great. It is hilarious. If you're an action fan, if you're an alternative comic book fan, if you're a Matthew Vaughn fan, if you're a comedy fan, like, this movie truly does have something to everyone. I remember I showed this to my brothers, and this is and I have a notoriously bad habit of showing movies to my brothers, and they hate them, but this is one of the few movies that I showed them that they actually really like. So that's my number 9, Kingsman: The Secret Service. If not for the rest of these 8 movies, I would put it higher. This movie is amazing.
Is this the one with that church scene?
Yes, this is the movie
Okay.
with that church scene.
I've seen this film, but it's been so long and I didn't have the time to rewatch it, so that I didn't want to put it on my list. And I haven't seen any of the films that came after it.
Yeah, there's
But
only one, and it's not worth watching.
okay, and there's a third one coming out soon,
There
right?
is. It's not. They were originally going to do a continuation, but Taron Egerton had to step away for like scheduling conflicts. So Matthew Vaughn ended up making a prequel about the founding of the Kingsmen with a whole new cast that takes place in like World War I when they were first formed. But that's got another huge cast. Like Ray Fiennes is in that movie, Daniel Bruhl's in that movie, Gemma Arterton, Jimon Hounsou, Stanley Tucci, bunch of guys. But it's like it doesn't involve any of the characters we've come to know in these first two Kingsman movies.
All right, so let me just say that I guess I'll go back and add one quick honorable mention, and it would be this film.
Yeah.
Because I remember being completely in awe by it, but just it's been a while, and the spy thing isn't my bag so much. So I didn't go back and rewatch it, but I was gonna kind of rewatch it if we decide to cover the third one. That's a conversation for a different day. But
that's the thing about this movie, though, is that this movie is that's the thing, because I wouldn't consider myself a spy fan. Like I said, I liked watching the Bond parodies. Like I only just started to get into James Bond film, and I'm like, these are all right, but like I don't see what the appeal is. Like Mission Impossible was starting to get stale for me, even though like those movies kept upping the action. Those movies like really transitioned to action movies. But like for people who are like kind of sick of the spy genre, this is the movie that I would recommend.
No, that makes sense. It did feel refreshing at the time, and I thought having that little suit closet with all the guns and stuff in it, I thought that was
good.
like
that's one of my. It's so good. It's so good.
It's coming back to me. It's not enough to put it on the list, and we're obviously in the middle of it. But I'm glad that I, can remember a little bit about it. So thank you for that very descriptive
down memory lane, if you will.
Yeah. Well, it's all due to your little descriptive spiel on that film, Dom, which I think was well said.
Well, thank you.
Sam Jackson. Dude,
he's
Sam
so
Jackson,
good.
Man.
That's honestly one of my. Honestly, after his Tarantino his 3 Tarantino movies that he's done, that is might be one of my favorite Sam Jackson performances. Like there are movies that Sam Jackson's in where he's kind of just being Sam Jackson. There's movies that he's good in, but you can kind of still tell that he's Sam Jackson. No, this is a movie that shows he's like, no, this is Oscar-nominated Sam Jackson, and he is flipping phenomenal in it.
Yeah, fair enough. Here's a film that I really, really liked the few times I saw it, but I kind of had to put it a little lower on my list just because when I saw it, I was more of a music guy, and so that's why this film really resonated with me. I haven't kind of gone back to it with my more trained film eye, and I like to do that because I think it's important to sort of go back in time as you grow as a critic, a commentator, a filmmaker, a writer. I think it's important to go back to the things that influenced you when you were in a different mental place to see if they still hold up, sort of test them. So I haven't been able to really test this film yet, but what I can test is my very fond memories of watching this movie a bunch of times the year that it came out and after, just tossing it on if it's on TV and I'm trying to fall asleep. And that's straight out of Compton, dude, because that is a great story. It is. I'm not the biggest hip hop fan, but what I can tell you is the journey and the story made me like the music. It got me to go back and be like, I'm not going to listen to albums, but I enjoy this, and I think that there's something in this for everyone. It's really well casted. I think the actors gave a great performance. I'll never forget that one scene where they pull over and he just found out that his brother died and the rest of them are all partying on the road, but it just felt so real, and it just felt so human, this film. And obviously their struggle is, hasn't gone unnoticed in history, and I just think it's one of those films that kind of keeps growing in importance as time goes on, and also just kind of as a great biopic, because it was a little more rough on the edges given the source material, but also just the fact that people hadn't, I felt, taken this much raw chances in biopics, at least what I've seen up to this point. So I really appreciate it for kind of working on so many different levels. And I think I'm going to have to go back, and once I finish my Community binge and my Avatar binge, hint, hint, nudge, nudge, I think I'm going to have to revisit this film and sort of see where it stands. I think the last time I saw it was 3 years ago. So yeah, coming in at number 8 for me is straight out of Compton. If memory serves me right, and normally it does, I thought this was a great film, and I'm excited to sort of rediscover it in a few weeks here. So,
dude, you have no idea how happy you just made me be that choice. I'm going to save my reaction for later on down this list, but yeah, I'm very, very happy that you made that choice. That's awesome. So moving on, my number, so spoilers. Come on. But so the what's it called? Put this in perspective. That movie got an Oscar for best original screenplay, but that's a whole different thing right there. Oh
Rightfully
yeah,
so.
very, very rightfully so. So my number 8 is a movie that I feel like it's interesting because this movie it really sucks because this is one of those movies that kind of didn't really have a shot at really making an impact when in all likelihood it should, because the problem is that if not for the movie that came out 3 years before this movie, I feel like this movie would have had a much bigger impact than it did. But because my number 8 entry, which is Steve Jobs, makes it very apparent, because this movie had the unfortunateness of following up the 2013 more straight up traditional biopic starring Ashton Kutcher, that being Jobs. Let's go. I didn't watch that movie. I heard mixed things about it. I heard that a lot of people said that movie wasn't as bad as it said, but whatever the case, the critics hated it. And so as a result, this movie kind of got shot in the foot before it got a chance to even be released. So this movie was interesting because this movie was supposed to be kind of the next Social Network. It was supposed to be the next collaboration between Aaron Sorkin and David Fincher. They were originally going to get Christian Bale for this part. This movie was in production hell for a few years. David Fincher ended up walking, Christian Bale ended up walking, and they ended up getting a couple other people, and they ended up getting Danny Boyle to direct this movie. Danny Boyle, who's slowly becoming one of my favorite filmmakers, because he's one of those guys when every time I see a movie of his, it's just a different type of a movie, and it always amazes me. Like this is the guy who directed Trainspotting, 28 Days Later, Sunshine, 127 Hours. He's the best picture and best director when it was Slumdog Millionaire. You know, he's got like a very unique filmography, and so, but this was the first time that I saw a movie from him, and I wasn't really sure what to make of it. And I also saw that who they got to replace Christian Bale as Steve Jobs was Michael Fassbender. And up to that point, obviously now we all know who Michael Fassbender is, but up to that point, the only thing that I'd seen Fassbender in was the X-Men movies. I hadn't seen Prometheus yet by that point. So when I watched this movie, I'm like, okay, I don't really know what to expect, but I'm like, but they can't just make this like another biopic like they did that Jobs movie. And then I walked into this movie, and I think everyone knows, it's no secret that everyone knows that I am one of the biggest Aaron Sorkin fans, you know? And what I will say is that while this movie was nowhere even close to The Social Network, I still think this was a brilliant movie. Because the great thing that this movie does is that rather than take the traditionalist biopic approach, it does, I think, the smart thing that, ironically enough, another biopic that came out that year, that being Love and Mercy, the Brian Wilson movie, did, is that rather than do like kind of having it be like a montage of Jobs' entire life, they picked They did a very interesting thing where they had it be this entire bottle experiment where it took place. Each act of the movie took place at a different function where Jobs was unveiling like the newest version of the iMac at the time. I forget which years. I think it was like between the late 80s and early 90s. And it's all about just like kind of the backdoor squabbling that he has with all of the different people that are working for him. And it kind of shows like he's a very typical Aaron. It's not a straight true biopic. He's another very typical Aaron Sorkin character where he's this misunderstood genius who doesn't get along with anyone. But like once he like explains it to everyone, it's like, oh, well, of course that's the thing. But I just remember this movie was the first movie that was written by Aaron Sorkin that I saw in theaters. And I was like, whoa, like this, the way that they were rapid firing off dialogue. I'm like, this is a bunch of techno babble that I have no idea what they're talking about, but like, I still understand what they're talking about, you know?
Like
and
Social Network.
Yeah, literally like Social Network. Like, again, I don't think that it's not the same type of a movie as Social Network, like, because Fincher is not here, and it's a very differently directed type of movie, but Danny Boyle still does an incredible job directing this. The supporting cast besides Fassbender is all great. Seth Rogen is Steve Wozniak, and even though I
thought Seth Rogen was in this film.
it was him, and even though I think that Rogen was still kind of starting to get to that point where like he was just like done playing anybody other than Rogen, I still thought he did a great job, especially given that Aaron Sorkin dialogue. Kate Winslet is terrific in this movie. Jeff Daniels is great in this movie. Michael Stuhlbarg is terrific in this movie. Michael Stuhlbarg, looking back more and more, might be like my favorite supporting performance in this movie. But still, to me, like the fact that this movie had so many hurdles to overcome, and Michael Fassbender to me ended up being the only actual person deserving of the Best Actor nomination when the Oscars got announced. And to me, like that was the best lead performance of that year. Like it may not have been like exactly true to who Steve Jobs was, and like maybe as the performance, but as far as like kind of paying spiritual ode to Jobs as a personality, it's definitely a little bit too Aaron Sorkin-y for its own good. But to me, this was an absolutely terrific movie, and it was one of my favorite movies. It was one of my favorite theater-going experiences of that year.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to check this one out.
Yeah,
because
it's interesting. I'd be very interested to see your take on it, because it's not a typical biopic, but I know how much you love Love and Mercy, and this is similar. It follows a similar structure to that. Not exactly the same, but similar. So,
no, yeah, totally. I this was a good year for biopics. It seems. So with that being said, on the complete other end of the spectrum, I'm gonna have to throw it to my boy, and he's not really my boy, but that was just a comfy segue. But I'm gonna give it to Joss Whedon's Avengers: Age of
Hell
Ultron,
yeah. I love that you
because
have this movie on here. I'm not going to front. I love that you have this movie on here at your number
yeah,
7.
hey man, look, I was very real with my Marvel epiphany. I don't think they're all amazing, but the ones that are will make any goddamn list that I have. And this being such a thin year, well, it was an easy ad, because I like the first Avengers film a lot, but I think that that first Avengers film, like any film of that size, of that magnitude, comes with its problems. And so to me, it was really nice to see, sort of looking back in retrospect, my Marvel journey that I've well documented on this thing had come from a Corona binge where I sort of caught up and filled the gaps in everything that I hadn't seen thanks to quarantine. And so it was a really nice breath of fresh air to be like, okay, so we're learning time management. We're growing. We're getting better at giving everyone an even amount of screen time while not taking away from the narrative. We're getting better at having a compelling one-off villain while we build to Thanos in the shadows, you know? So I really appreciate it for all that. But with all those things being said, right, those are things that any good filmmaker should be able to do as time goes on and as an IP sort of finds its stride. But what I really liked about this film was the fact that even though we knew it was a one-off villain, because we were sort of getting their first taste really of the big team up formula by this point, you know, James Spader was just so compelling, and he was just voice acting. I don't know if he was mocapped or not.
It was a little bit of mocap
Yeah.
involved, but
And
oh my god, everything you're saying, Chris, I'm like, yes. This is
yeah,
stuff I've been saying about this movie for years.
yeah, dude, I felt the urgency. I felt the tension. I felt the calamity and the potential effect Ultron could have had on the MCU. And I do personally think the MCU's biggest mistake of the early phases is getting to Thanos too quickly. I think there was so much unexplored territory with Ultron, considering if you look right now, the global economy is synced up to the internet. And dude, like, we are not in the best spot. And just the fact that Ultron could control the internet is just, there was so much more you could have done with that than just sort of the stepping stone to Thanos. But hey, you know, gotta look forward. They did great things with it. You can't argue that Infinity War and Endgame were amazing films, but you also can't forget where you came from. And
Chris,
that's why I think Age of Ultron needs to be on this list.
Chris, all I'm gonna say
So
to you is what Donald Glover said to to Danny Pudi Abed in so many episodes of Community, which is get out of my brain. Seriously, get out of my brain. Like, this is
yeah,
what you just said is everything that I have been saying about Age of Ultron since I saw that movie in theaters, and to this day, it still infuriates me. Like, yes, out of the 4 core Avengers movies, not counting Civil War, I know everyone likes to count that as another version of Avengers movie, and it is to an extent, but out of the 4 core Avengers movies, yes, Age of Ultron is the weakest by default. But it always killed me how everyone was always willing to write that off as like a bad movie. And I'm like, did you guys watch this movie? Do you understand that this movie did things that most blockbusters are A, terrified to do, and B, would never, ever be able to get away with? Yes, I agree with 1,000% them not using the internet and Ultron's ability to transverse through the internet is the biggest missed opportunity of that movie. But for the stuff that that movie does with the character, like, to me, I said it in my Marvel rankings, that movie does stuff with the core 6 Avengers that like no other Marvel/Avengers movie did.
yeah, exactly. Now, Dom, we have a schedule to keep here.
Yes,
And
we do.
I'm kind of
So
curious. What is your
I'm really
number
glad.
7
So
movie?
look, I'm not gonna front. I'm just gonna jump right into it. It's Star Wars: The Force Awakens, and contrary to what Chris was saying before, I get it, Chris. You've been burned by Disney. I get it. Trust me, I've been burned by Disney these last
I just
2
said all
movies
those
too.
good things.
Yeah,
about
but yeah, I know. Well, Age of Ultron was a weird spot because that was still when like Marvel Studios fell under the Marvel Entertainment branch that Ike Perlmutter was running, and then Kevin Feige managed to get it and make his own independent thing where he reported directly to Bob Iger, and that's what started with Civil War. But that's a whole different thing. So my thing with The Force Awakens is it's very interesting because as opposed to you, who you were like, yeah, Star Wars is back. I have already gone very in-depth and explicit with my relationship with Star Wars. Now, my whole thing is I watched all the movies when I was a kid, so I knew what Star Wars was. I watched them, I liked them, and it was that series that I watched, but I never really kind of found that special attachment to Star Wars until I watched the Clone Wars animated series. But this was different because from that first bit of marketing hype in 2014, when that first teaser dropped, I was like, oh my God, so this is what Star Wars is, you know, like with the quick little glimpses of all the new characters, and it wasn't even really like a story or anything. It was just like a quick, like a slideshow of all the characters that were going to be in it. And then you had the Star Wars theme blasting on with the Millennium Falcon flying through the desert and the logo playing. I'm like, oh, so this is what Star Wars is to people. And when I watched that movie in theaters, again, you got the adrenaline rush, you got the thing, but I was like, holy shit. I'm actually watching a Star Wars movie in theaters because I didn't watch any of the prequels in theaters. So this was my first Star Wars experience. And I don't know if this is just Stockholm Syndrome or like PTSD from how badly these new Star Wars movies have burned me. But just looking back, so again, the biggest criticism that everyone said, you said, everyone else has said it, is that there's no originality to this movie. It's a blatant repeat of The Force Awakens. But again, to their credit, it's the fact that, yes, the purpose of this movie was to get people back into Star Wars and to kind of re-understand the magic of Star Wars. But even more than that, this movie to me, this is the one instance where I would make the argument that the nostalgia case actually does factor into the story here, because the whole point of this movie, and what I thought was going to be the point of this new trilogy before I realized, oh wait, Kathleen Kennedy just has no idea what she's doing. The whole point of, again, how this movie fooled me, I guess you could say, is that I thought that this was going to be a movie and a franchise that actually tackles and examines the idea of nostalgia, where you have these new characters that are being introduced. And again, I will fully back you on it. These are great actors. And to me, for the most part, great, interesting new characters. I'm like, okay, so we already have a bad guy that we know is related to Darth Vader, but unlike Darth Vader, he wants to be a bad guy. Okay, you have another desert scavenger. And yeah, we've seen that before, but she actually might be the most powerful being in the universe, you know? Or even more interesting to me, the best thing that came out of that movie, we have a stormtrooper who actually wants to resist his programming. These were new things. And then when you brought in the idea of these old icons that they were interacting with, it was almost kind of like they were our voyeurs in terms of how the way that they saw those legends like Han Solo, like Chewbacca, like Luke Skywalker. It was the way that we saw them, you know? So that's why the whole idea of everyone writing this movie off as, oh, it's just a remake of The Force Awakens. I'm like, no, this is a great homage to The Force Awakens, but it is trying to do something new. The one big mistake that I think, the biggest mistake that I will say that this movie did, is its reliance on future movies and not having a good conclusion. Because to me, the biggest difference between the original Star Wars movie and this movie is the fact that this movie had an open ending that was meant to set up for sequels. The original Star Wars movie, you could watch that as its own closed-off movie without ever having to watch a single sequel, because the original Star Wars movie, they were never expected to get sequels, then it became Star Wars. And so that's kind of why I don't really buy into the whole argument of this is just a remake of A New Hope. It borrows a lot. I will be the first person to admit that. But for all the new stuff that this movie had, and for the stuff that I thought that this movie was trying to do before The Last Jedi and The Rise of Skywalker just came in and ruined everything, I'm like, no, this is actually something different. And I guess that, to me, is what has allowed this movie to hold up past just the amazing experience of finally getting to watch a Star Wars movie in theaters. And you saw this movie 3 times in theaters. I got you one better. I saw this movie 4 times in theaters. This was the first movie that I saw 4 times in theaters. It had that much of an effect on me. And even though, again, it's been very much marred by the movies that came in later, and I will fully give you Last Jedi and Rise of Skywalker, but for me at least, The Force Awakens I would still argue and say, is a great movie.
Yeah, for the sake of keeping this podcast about other films and not just being stuck on your number 7 pick, I'll just leave my comments to myself. Just know that you're wrong, but I'll just leave my comment.
Okay.
No, I'm just kidding. But
I was about to say, I see how it is, Chris. Show your true colors.
We may have to do a Force Awakens podcast, is what I'm getting from this. We may have to do our next year's Star Wars month. We may have to take a look at The Force Awakens in depth, because it seems that we are very much so on.
We've always been at polar opposite ends of the spectrum, though. Since we met, we have been at polar opposite ends of the spectrum.
I think we're so polar opposite that we could fill minimum 3 hours.
It would be great. Literally, no joke. This might be the key. This might be the key to us solving our Star Wars differences.
True. We may have to do this episode.
I think we might have to, dude.
Keeping it in space, I'll move to my number 6 film of 2015, which is The Martian.
Ooh.
Yeah, this film isn't a film that I talk about often, because I don't really talk about it for the screenplay, although I think the screenplay is strong, and I don't really talk about it for the characters, although I think the characters are strong. What I talk about this film for, when I do talk about it, is the reality of it, the realistic nature of this movie, the imagining that they did to come up with this that was felt so real and so rooted and so okay, well, if he actually is going to survive, he's taking all the steps that a rational human being would take that's as educated as him, that is as equipped to survive in those situations as him. So I really appreciated it for its grounded nature. Obviously, there is some craziness in this film, and it's a space movie, so it has that Hollywood effect, but it also just feels so organic, so human, and it's weird, but it works and it makes sense. And I like that. I like the grounded approach of this space film. And I thought that that was the charm of this movie. And I think everything else, the Donald Glover and Kate Mara characters, they were great. They really worked in their roles. And Matt Damon, of course, was awesome. I mean, he's pretty much in this movie the majority of the time. It's one of those space films that doesn't have many other actors in it, but it's not them that make the movie for me. It's them bringing to life the reality of the situation that feels so tangible and so real, and coupled with the stunning visuals of this movie, I just think it's great. It works. I think it's a nice little, this is what films were like in 2015. Okay,
Yeah.
that's cool. This was a space film in 2015. Wow, they came a long way from 2001. I think it'll make that kind of conversation as one of like the important films of last decade in the space genre. I don't think it's certainly one of the greatest films of last decade. Again, like I said, this was a weaker year, but this is one of the stronger picks for me. So yeah, I just thought this was like an impressive little film. I know it was based off a novel, but I heard it was also adapted pretty heavily. So I'm going to credit the filmmakers for doing a good job and kind of giving us a different type of space film. And for that, I put The Martian at number 6.
Yeah, so the whole thing about if I can just dive into my relationship with The Martian real quick. This was a movie I remember I really liked. I really, really liked it the first time I saw it in theaters. The whole thing is that Ridley Scott directed this movie. And again, looking at this movie, like, Chris, would you have told me that if you knew this beforehand that this movie was if I told you that this movie was directed by the same guy who directed Alien and Blade Runner, would you tell me that, like, you're crazy? I had no idea that guy directed this movie.
I wouldn't have believed that because I forgot until now that he directed it, and he has directed 2 of my favorite films of all time.
Yeah, exactly.
They don't make the conversation when this does not make the conversation when I talk about Ridley Scott.
Yeah, it's funny because the whole thing about Ridley has had such a vast array of films that are in so many different genres that people always forget that, like, when you get like a Thelma and Louise or like this movie, like a Martian, or like I'm trying to think of like something else that you wouldn't expect them to do.
Black Hawk Down.
Like Black Hawk Down, yeah, like all those movies, like all those movies, you're like, wait, you almost have to, like, American Gangster, you almost have to remind yourself, like, wait, Ridley Scott directed those movies? But yeah, he's got like some great ones. Like, everyone always remembers him for Alien and Blade Runner. It's like those movies define the rest of his career, but he's still got some other good ones. And the whole thing is, when I saw this movie, Ridley had been coming off of like a decade that had been pretty filled with disappointment. The Robin Hood reboot with Russell Crowe, the Prometheus movie, The Counselor, Exodus, Gods and Kings. Yeah, not a lot of good movies, to say the least. But so when I watched this movie, I'll say this was refreshing, to say the least. But I'll tell you the other big thing is, so you mentioned the writing. So you got another superstar behind the pen here, because again, another Academy Award nominated screenplay, because the writer of this is the writer/director of The Cabin in the Woods and the writer-director of Bad Times, the El Royale, that being Drew Goddard. And looking back again,
the Lost guy.
Yes, you're Lost boy. And
this movie,
and the whole thing about this movie is that looking back, this is a movie that definitely was not as memorable to me as some of these other movies. But looking back, I'm always like, yeah, that movie was good. It was enjoyable, but it's definitely worth a rewatch. It was one of my favorite movies when I saw it. But looking back, I'm like, yeah, it's a good movie, and it definitely stands out as, like, again, being in that space genre. But again, like, for all those factors, like, that's why that movie stands out for me. But
fair enough, dumb.
So if we're moving on to my number 6, so again, like you said, 2015 was the year of reboots, and everyone remembers Jurassic World and Force Awakens. But in terms of another movie that was kind of a remake/reboot of a previous movie, but again, was also my introduction to one Ryan Coogler before he lit up the screen 3 years later with Black Panther. I remember I watched this movie, and similar to the way that The Force Awakens was the first Star Wars movie that I ever saw in theaters, this was the first Rocky movie that I ever saw in theaters, with my number 6 choice, Creed. Now, I think it's safe to say, Chris, that Rocky, the first movie, is a very special movie for both of us. To me, it's one of my favorite movies of all time. And so the whole thing is that I'd watch every single Rocky sequel, and I enjoyed every single one of them, even 5 to a certain extent. I also think that Rocky Balboa, which came out in 2006, which is the one, what's it called? That which was Stallone coming back to the camera after taking a break for 5. And even that one I thought was underrated. The problem is it came out, it was kind of enmeshed. Nobody really cared about Rocky. It had been 16 years since the last one. And so when this movie was coming out, I'm like, oh, cool, Rocky's gonna come back, but it was one of those things where I remember I was at my aunt's house and I was reading up plot summaries for movies that were coming out. And I remember I saw this movie, I'm like, wait a minute, Rocky's gonna treat Apollo Creed's son? And I'm like, wait a minute, Apollo Creed had a son, But then, I saw the trailers for this movie, and the trailer did the very smart thing of not making Rocky the star of it. And this movie used Rocky and Stallone in a very interesting way. And the thing that I liked about this is that rather than just being a straight up reboot of Rocky, again, similar to the way that what I loved about The Force Awakens, it was kind of rechristening all the things that I liked about Rocky, but as a story for a new generation, where you have this kid Adonis. Also, my introduction to Michael B. Jordan, by the way, too, when I was like, yeah, who the hell is this guy? And I want to see him in every movie going forward.
Good introduction.
Yeah, very good introduction. And as he's getting up, and you see that he works at this really great office job, and he's got this great life because Apollo's because Apollo's widow took him in and raised him as her own, even though he is clearly established being born out of wedlock. And that right off the bat established this movie as being something different. And you get this crazy rich introduction to this kid, but a full 20-30 minutes before you bring Rocky in. And then they bring Rocky in when he travels to Philadelphia. And the introduction there was great because it's at Adrian's and it's bringing back all these feelings that I got from watching Rocky as a kid, and I'm like, oh my God, yes, this is amazing. I remember I saw it a few days before Thanksgiving, and I saw it before any of my family members did, and I saw this movie, and I'm like, my family's gonna freaking love this movie, because everything that Rocky does in this movie, because it wasn't another, because Sylvester Stallone had been doing so many of those action movies, even when he was starting to get in his late 60s and early 70s, and I was starting to get to the point where I'm like, dude, come on, you gotta hang it up. You're 70 years old, you're gonna kill yourself at one of these points. But this
never hangs it up, man.
But this was one of the points where it reminded me, I'm like, oh, wow, Sylvester Stallone is, a great actor. Because, yeah, you can pin it on the argument that, he's played Rocky a bunch of different times. He knows this role at the back of his hand. But it's funny because this brings it back to an argument that I heard on a couple different things, which is how each movie in the Rocky franchise reflects a different stage that Sylvester Stallone is at in his career. And this really seemed to establish that perfectly, where he's kind of this tired out guy. He's got this great legacy of movies, but nobody really kind of knows or cares about him anymore. And then you get this kid who comes to him out of nowhere, who knows him for this whole different thing that he hasn't really seen or talked about in years, and kind of the connection that they form, and how they each kind of make themselves better as a result of it. This is a very special movie, to say the least. Ryan Coogler, oh my God, this wasn't his directorial debut, but for me, it was my introduction to him. And even though I think Black Panther was a much weaker film, there was a reason why I think this guy has such a special tone towards what he goes for with his films that he makes. It's an excellently made film. It's a great ode to the original Rocky series, and it's one of my favorite movies from that year, and honestly, from this past decade. It's one of those movies that I almost forget how great it is. And every time I rewatch clips of it, every time Stallone is going off on one of his little monologues, I'm like, it just makes me even more sad that he didn't win the Oscar for that movie. But yeah, number 6, Creed.
Yeah, this would definitely be my second honorable mention. See, we're finding them as we go along. I thought it was a really compelling sort of not narrative plot device, but choice to have him be this guy who had no reason to really throw it all away to jump into the ring. He was, by all intents and purposes, well set up. What a lot of people go to college and school to have. He had that stability. He had that financial security. And so I thought that was interesting. I also thought Stallone kind of honored, Mickey. And I thought that was a nice little contrast, sort of seeing him, because you don't ever really get to see, you don't get to see the kid in Home Alone grow up. You know what I mean? You don't get to see those types of things. So to see this after all this time and not have it be de-aging or aging technology, just have it be okay, we're here now, and he's this guy now that was once giving him the advice. It was just cool. I liked it. It was a good film. I forgot about this one.
Yeah,
not that it would have made my list if I had really
good movie
remembered, but it is a really good movie. And you know what else is a good movie, Dom?
Your number 5 choice?
My number 5.
Did you think I was gonna go there?
Yeah, this is just the kind of chemistry I think that you dream to have with a co-host. I think we're close to that Joe Rogan and Jamie symbiosis now, where you kind of just you knew what I was gonna say, and you answered it, dude. Like, and yeah, people are gonna be like, "Oh, it was obvious. They were moving on to the next number," but no,
That's what
Dom
I
would have
do.
known if it was something different. Okay,
Yeah, I
and
would have known.
you guys aren't on the production phone call, so you don't know. But you got to trust us when we say that Dom knows. And one thing Dom knew was to say, "Hey, Chris, I know we're doing this episode, and I know we don't have much time to plan for it, but you, because I know you." See, I was going somewhere with that long-winded tangent, Dom.
Oh my
And I
god,
know,
yes! About goddamn time!
and I know
Been
you
waiting for you
have
to watch this
to
goddamn movie for years!
exactly. I know you have to get this film in before we do this. It's just
Oh
one
yeah.
film, Chris. You can watch it. Take a break from your Community and Avatar binge. Hint, hint, nudge,
I'm like,
nudge.
just this one! Just
And
this one!
exactly. And so this film that comes for me at number 5 is, I think, the start of like the good films. Not that, well, like the really good films on this list. Going through this 2015 is a great year. A lot of these movies aren't in my top 10 favorite movies of all time, but they're also not in my top worst movies of all time. So yeah, What We Do in the Shadows comes in at
Hell
number 5.
yeah!
Taika
Dude,
Waititi.
what did you think?
So I thought this was a weird beast. Okay. I think so. I watched this with my morning coffee yesterday morning, and I think there was no better way than to wake up watching a movie about vampires, because it's sort of an interesting dichotomy there, just to dissect in general. Vampires live at night, and uh, you know, we are awake during the day. But with all that being said, I I thought it was weird, man. It was like watching The Office skinned with vampires.
Told you!
And I
Told
like
you!
that. I really like that. I think the character of Stu was
Oh my
one of the
god.
funniest things I've ever seen, because I could only imagine what it was like in that writer's room. They were like, "Hey man, listen, we are going to just write a character, and his only trait is going to be that he has a name. He is going to be special at nothing. He is going to just be a generic human being that you've seen time and time again. But here's the thing. All the other characters are going to think he is the man, and they are going to fight tooth and nail for this guy, and that's where the comedy comes in." And I think it's one of those things where, like, you could watch it, and if you are, well, there's a certain palette that this is for. So I don't know how successful this movie was. I can't imagine it was a smash, because I think this is always meant to be one of those cult type films, like a Donnie Darko appreciation level it can garner, but that's fine, because I think like that's the purpose of these kind of movies. And for me, I'm in that cult. I'm that kind of audience who gets this kind of humor. So to not keep it too long-winded, characters are great. The setting was awesome. I loved the style. I loved the feel. I love the textures. I loved the scenarios that they brought themselves into. The puns were awesome, especially because they were kind of few and far between. And this is just like, the word zany doesn't even do it justice.
No,
This
it
is
doesn't.
just,
Oh
it's a
my
great film,
god.
and it's my number 5.
Chris, I don't think you understand quite how happy you just made me after having finally watched it. You guys, I don't think you understand. I have literally been trying to watch. So it's funny. So my brief history with it. I watched this movie in Dutchess about like a couple months before I met Chris, and obviously Taika Waititi has gone on to become a superstar now with Thor Ragnarok and Jojo Rabbit. But this was my introduction to him, and I'm like, oh man, I don't know who this guy is, but I want to see every single movie that he does from now on, because I'm like, the whole thing is that it took me so long to get into the American Office. But by the time I finally started to appreciate this humor, but I finally was at the age where I could start to appreciate that humor. And I also was starting to really get into vampires. But the whole thing is that while everyone else was watching Vampire Diaries and Twilight and all that crap, I was watching True Blood on HBO. And I'm like, yeah, let's go that route. And so when you finally took vampires, which were a species that like I always wanted to see done right in a cool movie, but had never really gotten a chance to see that. And then they get put in like this bonkers, bizarre, like Office-esque setting where you're kind of just like watching them just like go about their real everyday lives. I love this movie. I remember I showed this to my cousin, and I never in a million years thought that she would have loved it, but she loved this movie. Like, if her favorite character was Peter, who was like the super old, like 4,000-year-old, like Count Orlok-esque vampire. And man, this is such a special kind of a movie. It's the whole movie is basically improvised, which is why it's got like that natural feel to it. Like Taika and Jermaine.
Really,
they
the
just
family photo is awesome. Like,
it's so good.
That just says it all.
And the thing is that even though Taika and Jermaine are great, as Vladislav and Viago. I still think my favorite character of the vampires is Deacon, the Jonathan Brook character. He is hysterical. And then like all the little different tidbits that they bring, like this is a great movie. I'm not going to go into it.
You know what I want to do? Because I think we can have a way longer discussion on this. Is the TV show still airing?
Yes, it is.
So I think we both should catch up and sort of cover it when
we might have
the
to.
New season comes out. Because I want to dedicate an hour just to this movie. And
yeah, I wanted to watch the show. Now, I wanted to watch the show so badly, but it was kind of one of those things where I'm like, oh, I don't want to risk the chance of having this ruin the magic of this movie. Because this movie really was a magic that did have a magic to it. And the only reason, I'm going to explain this right now. The only reason why this didn't make my top 10 of this list, as unfortunately did, is because for the longest time, I thought this was a 2014 movie. And this is why I freaking hate the translation and difference between foreign releases versus American releases. Because the reason why this didn't get like a big wide smash, I heard all the Collider and the Schmoes Know people who I was dedicated to at the time talking about this movie. And I'm like, oh my God, I'm finally going to watch this movie. And they were talking about it in 2014, which is when it was released in Australia, in Taika and Jermaine's native Australia. But it didn't get an official release in the US until February of 2015. And that's why it kills me. Because by that point, I'm like, I've already had my top 10 locked up for months. So still kills me.
But hey,
but
just so people out there,
it's a great movie. And I'm so happy that you finally watched it. So
yeah, man. So if people out there are wondering, just to establish some sort of show culture here, if they're like, well, if it came out in 2014, why'd you put it in your 2015 list? Because we
go by American release dates.
We go by the release date of the country we live in, which is America. So that's how we do it here. So yeah, I think I've heard great things about the show. I've heard people who had the same fear as you, people who that I listen to that have a lot of respect sort of dissecting this thing like you and I do. So I think we should at least, because I want to talk about this more, and I think that's the way to do it. But it's a great movie, Dom. We need to this, even if it's just another one-off about this film, I can fill we said 3 hours.
I can talk about this movie for 3 hours long. But unfortunately, we don't have 3 hours. We got to move on.
But your next film is an awesome film.
Yeah, my number 5 movie. We're throwing it back to your number 8, dude. I remember. So correct me if I'm wrong, Chris. Before I reveal the identity, did you watch this movie in theaters?
Yeah.
Okay, I wasn't sure. So it's funny. This was such a special movie because obviously my family has had this long vacation of always going to Florida. And so this was the summer where I could finally I can go off on my own and watch a movie on my own with my friend before I can go off and get stuck in a condo, in a 3-room condo with my family for a week. And the whole thing is that I was never that familiar with NWA until I watched this movie. And this movie, above everything else great that this movie did, it was a brilliant education lesson. Because this, to me, was kind of the first movie that made me understand, okay, this is the struggle that artists have to go through in order to make their stuff work. And obviously, again, their struggle, I think, is a vastly different struggle than ours. But the point being is that there are still core elements that are still relatable. Because my number 5 is straight out of Compton. Oh my God. When I watched this movie, I was blown away. I remember I was sitting there, I was chilling. It was a packed theater, and we were all jamming out, people of all ages, every time they started rapping. And it was it was my discovery to all the songs that they did. And again, it's crazy because I would never once consider myself a fan of rap music until I watched that movie. And I was like, oh my God. I knew who Ice Cube was because I'd watched the Jump Street movies, and I knew who Dr. Dre was because everybody knew who Dr. Dre was. But seeing these guys and seeing how they came up and seeing what they had to deal with, it's so strange to talk about this in hindsight, because I watched this movie and I'm like, this is one of the greatest. I'm right now, I'm this is one of the greatest movies that I've ever seen. And it was never a movie that I expected to really like or love that much. But seeing what these guys went through, seeing the chemistry and the relationship that is formed between the core 3 and how they what went through, it's kind of the thing. It really sucks that this has to kind of be factored in and even compared to movies like Bohemian Rhapsody and Rocket Man and all the god-awful music biopics that we've had to sit through in these last couple of years. Because to me, this was the idea of, forget a music biopic, this was just kind of the next step in biopic storytelling. And the crazy thing is that I saw this with a friend of mine who I never in a million years, nothing against it, but he's just not the type of guy who enjoys these types of movies. And he watched that and he's like, that was amazing. And I'm like, Wayne, you like that movie? And he was like, I loved it. That was one of the best movies I've seen so far. And I don't know if like I have like a really soft spot because it came out so close to my birthday, because it was only like a few weeks before my birthday. But like the whole thing is that like I have this running joke that August movies are usually not good. It's like the end of the summer. But every once in a while, I get that one movie in August that is like, yes, it was Guardians of the Galaxy, the first Guardians of the Galaxy movie in 2014. It was Kubo and the Two Strings in 2016. And it was this movie in 2015. Good freaking God. I love this goddamn movie. It's a crying shame that it didn't get nominated for more stuff. Credit to O'Shea Jackson Jr., credit to Corey Hawkins, credit to Jason Mitchell as Eazy-E. Oh my God, that performance that was oh man.
Highlights right there.
Yeah,
this movie showed that like
I love this movie.
Rock and roll is more than just a genre. It could be used as an adjective.
Yeah,
this movie
it really can. Like this movie was. See, you use rock and roll. I would credit this as punk rock because this was.
I just said it's rock and roll. It's punk rock. Yeah.
Oh my God, I love this movie. Straight Outta Compton, my number 5.
Yeah,
and this movie is directed by the same guy who directed Friday. Keep that in mind.
Well, we just spoke about Ridley Scott and how diverse a palette he has. It's creators should be able to move from one thing to the next freely. That's the beauty of sort of just creative art and freedom. And yeah, that's a phenomenal film. I'm glad it's on both of our lists. I figured it would be on yours. I just wasn't sure because you've seen 55 movies. So with that being said, we're moving into my number 4 film, which was the Best Picture winner of that year.
Spotlight.
Oh no, sorry, not Spotlight. Then what did this film win? The Revenant.
The Revenant? Oh, this was Leo's Oscar for Best Actor, and it won Director, but it didn't win Picture.
Yeah. Fair enough. It won. He had that speech that got everyone all in a tizzy, and so that's what I remember. I remember him winning. But dude, this film, I will just go out and say that I hate these kind of films for the most part. They're slow. They're boring. I get it. The pioneers, all those kind of people had a difficult life. But honestly, I've never really been compelled by it on the screen. It's kind of my problem with like when we were in the west part of Westworld. Just so boring, dude. I don't care about cowboys and just like fur trapping and all that stuff.
Not a Western fan. I think it's safe
don't
to say.
care. I really don't care. But this film made me care like a lot. So with that being said, it's not just Leo's performance. It's everything. This film was beautifully shot. I mean, this was one of those films that I was like, whoa, cinematography. You know what I'm saying? Like, and I was like, I need to learn more about that aspect. And among many other things, this film, I don't want to say it's like a masterclass in like an Oscar awards type film, but now that I've got a few of those under my belt, I can see the appeal and I can see why the Academy kind of like, leans towards these types of films because there's a lot that's good from it. And it doesn't mean that, certain films like Black Panther and like Guardians of the Galaxy shouldn't also be represented in the Oscars. That's the other side of the problem because those are great films too. They're not as classically great as The Revenant is. And as I think people could make a case for. But so that's my one problem with the Academy, but I can see why they like this film a lot. And this is just a good film, dude. I'll never forget DiCaprio cutting a horse open and sleeping in it. That's for better or for worse. That'll be with me forever.
Oh, man. I have so many thoughts on this movie. Like the one thing I will say is I don't want to take away from the brilliance of the filmmaking that goes into this movie. But what I'll say is that 1 year after seeing this director, Alejandro Iñárritu's, my first film of his, that being Birdman, the previous year's Best Picture winner, which is one of my favorite movies of the last decade. My thing about this movie is I don't want to say that it's overhyped or a letdown. But for me, at least, this movie was overhyped, and I hate that they used the fact that Leo had never won an Oscar and all the behind-the-scenes BS just to win him an Oscar. Now, that didn't distract me from this movie, from like the movie itself. The movie itself is brilliantly made. It's one of the most well-shot, one of the most well-acted, one of the definitely most intense. Like, I'll never forget like that opening scene where those Native Americans are attacking them. And I'm like, oh my God, like this is actually intense and scary. And but yeah, all the acting all around is great. Again, Tom Hardy is great. Donald Gleason and Will Poulter in their tiny parts back before they were Donald Gleason and Will Poulter are great. My problem with this movie, and why, as I went on more and more and more, and why it didn't hold up for me is nothing to do with the BS Oscar campaign to win DiCaprio's Oscar when he should have won 2 years before for Wolf of Wall Street. My problem with this is the fact that it kind of exposed me to Inarritu as a filmmaker, which is where he's pretty much the Mexican Terrence Malick, which is that he makes a very beautiful looking film about a struggle that, if shot more classically, in a more classically styled film, would be riddled with cliches. And it's almost like he's just cutting to random various beautiful shots of nature in order to just like have it be there. And it doesn't, and the more and more I thought about it, it doesn't add a lot to the story. It's a very pretty looking movie, and it's a very intense movie that you can kind of get lost in and have an experience with. But as a film itself, it's not one of my favorites the more and more that I thought about it. And especially given I wanted Fassbender to win. So like I said, it sounds like I'm nitpicking, to be completely honest, but like that's just why like that film like doesn't hold up as well for me as one of my favorites. But so if we're moving on to my number 4, it's funny that you bring up and you put The Revenant as your number 4, because I see almost this movie, The Revenant, being the spiritual rival of my choice at number 4. Because my problem is that this movie was previously my number 1 favorite movie of this year. But as time went on, I found that there were a few things that kind of just held this movie back. But this movie, to me, I feel like was doing everything that The Revenant wanted to do, and that is Sicario. Now, for this movie, for people who don't remember this movie, this was the movie that was directed by a little-known guy named Denis Villeneuve, who, for anybody who has lived under a rock and doesn't know who this guy is, this is the director of Prisoners, Arrival, and Blade Runner 2049. He's also directing the upcoming Dune movie. And it was written by Taylor Sheridan, who was a star on Sons of Anarchy the first 2 seasons, and would later go on to write Hell or High Water and write and direct Wind River. To me, Taylor Sheridan is the guy that really mastered the idea of doing the modern-day Western. And the interesting thing is, this to me is another situation where, again, it's in a very classic, in a more classically shot movie, this would be like the most generic action movie ever. But the way that it is shot and the slow close-ups into the intense look, as you understand kind of the fish out of water angle that they're taking with Emily Blunt, because again, it's your typical cops and robbers thing where Emily Blunt is a wet behind the ears DEA agent who is going with this specialized task force directly into Mexico in order to take down the biggest and baddest drug cartels, only to find out that the people she's running with don't play by the rules. Again, that's the setup for like the most basic corrupt cop 90s movie you've ever heard. But the way that this movie is shot and the approach that's taken to it, it almost comes off like a neo-Western, almost like a Logan, where the brilliant thing that this movie does is that it places you in Emily Blunt's shoes, and it really makes you realize just out of her depth and just how terrified she is, where even though she's the law, you realize that she is not the one with power. And how this movie tackles that angle, specifically with the Benicio del Toro character, his character, the Alejandro character that he plays, where the entire second half of this movie becomes his movie, and you realize just like, he really is just like a loose cannon, and that like, it's one of those movies where I really enjoy how it breaks down kind of that struggle of like the idea of what we perceive is the presiding power versus what the actual power is. And the way that they tackle that from the drug cartel angle, to me, it was almost like a spiritual successor to Breaking Bad in a weird way. And I like how you credit the cinematography for The Revenant, but the way that Roger Deakins shoots this movie for Sicario, to me, this was the movie that should have won him his cinematography award. And oh man, the intensity and the suspense that comes from this movie is unequaled by any other movie. And I remember when I watched this movie and it blew me away. And the fact that it was almost ignored by the Oscars that year was a travesty in my mind. So that's my number 4, Sicario.
Yeah, no, you made a good case for that film. It's been on my list to watch for a while, and I'll have to get to it.
It's a good movie.
Here's a film that Dom and I podcasted on
number 3.
so long ago.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah, it's bringing it back. Full circle, baby.
Yeah. Number 3 for me is The Hateful Eight, and here's why. I am a huge fan of one location movies. Reservoir Dogs being one of them. Love that film. And so to me, to get this film in this setting, a setting that again, I have hated. I've always thought it was boring. And yeah, I get life probably sucked back then, but guess what? I grew up with air conditioning and I grew up with heat, and I don't relate to that. So for you to make me relate to that and make my my spoiled self feel something when watching that setting, yeah, you get me. You get me if you can do that. And this film got me because there's this one scene where, oh God, it's like right at the end where they're just firing back and everyone like just jumps in with their line. And I'm like, oh man, I'm like watching Shakespeare. I'm watching theater. There just happens to be a camera recording it and they just happen to be cutting because without the camera, I feel like I'd be sitting in a theater watching all these people just give an amazing performance. And that's where film comes from. Film comes from theater, it comes from plays, and as time progressed, we put a camera in front of it, but they're still actors. There's always been actors. So to like touch into that and to make me go all the way back to that, I was like, wow, this film's working on some deep levels. And yeah, I it's not that I hate the Western genre. It's just that I'm more of a fan of like my Western narratives just to be covered in spaceships and lasers. Okay. So, but I don't have any issues with it. I was just kidding about being harsh against it, but it's just not like what I'm turning on a Friday night. So for me to be putting this film on probably like 6 or 7 times now and to watch that poor Martin guitar get destroyed every time, which is a relic
Oh,
of music
it's
and
so sad.
history,
It's so sad.
but I can still watch it because it's a great film. And yeah, Tarantino, it's in my opinion one of his best, and I'll die on that hill. So
Yeah.
that's all I got to say about it. Dom, we
Again,
should
it's always tricky whenever you talk about a Tarantino movie because when you talk about the worst, you're really just talking about the fact that it's still great. He's just got all these other movies that are just so much better. Like to me, the only two movies of Tarantino that I've seen that I don't like
Jackie
as
Brown
much as this movie are Jackie Brown and Kill Bill Volume 2. So again, like I already talked about this movie. So moving on to my number 3. So this is a movie, Chris, you've only recently started to get into Pixar and understand the magic of them. But me, I've been a diehard Pixar guy from day one. And so again, I didn't realize how much of an effect this movie would have on me because again, it was another movie. I saw this movie like my finals week. Like this was literally like the movie that I watched right after I was done with high school. So it was marking the end of a journey. I saw it with a bunch of my friends at the time. And in my opinion, especially now with all the movies we've gotten since then, it is the last great Pixar movie to me. That's Inside Out. Oh my God, this movie, what a goddamn movie. Like Pete Docter had done some great movies before for Pixar. Like he did Monsters Inc., he did Up, but this was him showing like what he was capable of. Because Pixar had kind of obviously gotten that track record of doing these crazy inventive, very ingenious, very human stories about these crazy inanimate objects, toys, monsters, talking cars, talking dogs, robots, all this crazy stuff. And
what could they possibly do next?
Exactly. What could they possibly do? And on top of the fact that this was 4 years after, arguably, in my opinion, their magnum opus with Toy Story 3. Like, the movies that had come out after Toy Story 3 continue to show us, like, yeah, was Toy Story 3 going to be the last great movie we got from Pixar? Because think about it. We got Cars 2, Brave, and Monsters University immediately after Toy Story 3. Things did not look bright at all for Pixar. But then I saw this movie and I saw the trailer. And I remember just the jokes and the gags that they had. Because in my opinion, this was probably their boldest original idea yet that they had gone for. This idea of dealing with emotions and literally giving the emotions inside of our heads that we're feeling personalities and thoughts and feelings of their own. And besides the fact that every single one of those 5 emotions was cast perfectly to a T, like it was crazy to me how well those cast. Like 2 Office stars, obviously with Phyllis and Kelly as Sadness and Disgust. Amy Poehler, who I had yet to watch Parks and Rec, as Joy, who's so perfectly cast. Louis Black as Anger. Bill Hader as Fear. And just the emotional journey that it went through. I'll definitely attribute this to the fact that I was definitely in a very specific point. I was just finishing up high school. It was like just right on the cusp of like really understanding what adulthood would become. And I just realized now, it's one of those movies where, again, Pixar is known for making those movies that you watch as a kid and you love, and you watch again as an adult and you love it even more because it just has those different thought processes and themes that more so to apply to you as an adult. And the sad parts of this movie, oh man, it still brings a tear to my eye. Like this idea of, because this movie to me, for all these movies that we've gotten about like kind of harkening back and like remember all the nostalgic things from your kid, this was an animated kids movie that was dealing with saying goodbye to your childhood in the most tragic, gut-wrenching way possible. And for a Pixar movie to deal with maturity in this way by literally dealing with the emotions and the constantly changing feelings inside your head and literally give those guys a voice, to me, it's their most brilliant premise that they've done. if not for some of their other movies, this to me is one of the best that they've done, and it's the last great Pixar movie in my mind, at least until Soul comes out. We'll see if that can measure up. But yeah, this movie is absolutely brilliant. My number, if not for my top 2 choices, this would be my favorite movie of that year, like number 3, Inside Out.
Yeah, and you better bet we're going to be covering Soul, so stick around for that one. Stick with us. Also, shout out the little Ratatouille cameo, but you guys can look that Easter egg up on your own time. But I also like Inside Out, and if I had to have 3 honorable mentions, then that would certainly be the 3rd. Moving on to number 2 and the home stretch, as they like to say here.
Yep.
We have
almost there,
left,
people.
So with that being said, this film is a great film, and it's The Big Short. Everyone,
oh my God! Wait a minute! Hold on. We have this at the same spot. We can both talk about it. My number 2 is The Big Short.
Yeah, dude, this is a great film.
Great movie.
This is on my list of things that I wanted to talk about coming into our second incarnation of this podcast.
You love this movie, and I remember how much you told me how much you love this movie.
Here's why I love this movie. Okay, it is a complex situation. What happened? We are still living in the aftermath of it. The economy is still recovering from it, but this movie explained all that in such a clear and concise way in like an hour and 40 minutes. You did not feel confused because this is very much so an info dump as much as it is a film.
Yes.
And for them to not make it feel like an info dump is just awesome because you get into the characters. Yeah, sure. Do I think that Steve Carell's character was a little underdeveloped? Yes, I do. Do I think that? Well, no, sorry, Brad Pitt's character rather.
Yeah, Brad Pitt. Yes, I would say much more so than Carell.
But like, it's fine because he still brought something to the role for what was a glorified info dump, which was really just like, I think, a very much so needed light shined on this crazy thing that happened to our family. We were young, our country rather.
I didn't even really know what was happening.
Something that our families, this is why I was saying family, our families had went through, but we were too young to really see the effects. But I mean, you can learn from history. And so this is important to sort of, get this, but also have it be entertaining because it is a very heavy situation. So you don't really want necessarily doom and gloom all the time if you're turning a film on. You want to have some escapism. So the way that this film worked on so many different levels kind of makes me go back to the Detective Pikachu in the sense that the strength of the screenplay and its ability to tap into so many different layers while still giving you what you want, but also heightening your sense of Pokemon, heightening your sense of what happened in 2008. Yeah, brilliant. You know what I'm saying?
The only thing that I'm going to add to that is obviously this being Adam McKay showing that he was done with the yucks. He was done with his funny movies, his Anchormans, his Talladega Nights, his Step Brothers, his other guys. He was done with that. He was going on to more serious fare. And obviously besides this movie being the precursor for, in my opinion, the best show that HBO has right now, Succession, because he directed the pilot of Succession. That's why these two tones have like very similar feelings to them. This movie to me was kind of the first of this weird line of films we got, which is kind of like the docudrama, or in this case, the docudramedy, which is that, again, he's taking a documentary approach, and this basically is an info dump. Like every actor, when they come on, they're doing these random cutaways where they're basically just explaining all these principles. And what I didn't realize is that this was another movie that I watched with my family, and my dad was kind of pausing the movie and explaining to me everything to it. And I'm like, wait a minute, this is an Adam McKay movie. This is the guy who did Step Brothers and the other guys. And my dad loved this movie. My dad's also like a huge money guy. And the great thing about this movie is, to me, the staying power of this movie. Because I know a couple people who don't like this movie, don't think it holds up well. And I could not disagree more. Because to me, what makes this film hold up is the absurdity of the situation. Because when it comes to absurdist comedy, nobody does it better than Adam McKay. And to take this situation, which was very much absurd, like the whole thing about it is that the reason why it was explained the way it was is because it was a situation that when you broke it down, you're like, how the hell did this happen? And how did people let them get away with it for so long? And the only people who noticed it were this bunch of random, weird side characters who, by the time they did notice it, it was already too late. And the best that they could do was look out for, their own companies and make sure that they didn't get screwed the way that everyone else was going to. And it's one of those situations where I talked about this before, which is that comedy is often a great viewpoint for tragedy. You laugh so that you don't cry. And this to me was a great example of that, where, and the more and more I got into this movie and the more and more layers they broke down that went into this vast puzzle that was the housing crisis. And you just realize just how many different working parts were involved. And you kind of just find yourself on this maze of a journey. and you're like, oh wow, this is it gets more and more progressively ridiculous. And yeah, it was a great movie. It stood out to me immediately. I'm like, yeah, this movie deserved every single accolade that it got. So yeah, The Big Short, both of our number twos.
Yeah, rightfully so, man. It's
It's a
just
great movie.
it holds up. I don't even want to speak to your people who don't think it holds
Yeah,
up.
no,
Okay,
it's those
they're
people
just
aren't worth
wrong.
talking about. Those people
They're
aren't
just
worth
wrong.
talking about. They're not worth even talking about.
Well, guys, thank you for listening, but the show's not over yet
Not
because
yet.
we are here. We
Drum
made it.
roll. Number
And
one.
my number one film,
So I'm actually interested because I really thought it was going to be Hateful Eight or Big Short. So it's not any one of those two.
it's not. No, instead,
Ooh.
it is the phenomenal, the unrivaled,
Oh, I know what it is.
my favorite superhero film of all time. Fantastic. No, I'm just kidding.
I was about to say
It's
I was about to say, don't you dare. Don't you dare. I'm like, I know you're a troll, but don't you dare. Okay, good.
Love and Mercy. This film is not only my favorite film of this year, it is my favorite biopic of all time. It is in my top 20 films of all time. I still haven't done that ranking, but it's probably high teens, low single digits. And it is just a brilliant look at not only the struggles of fame, but the struggles of mental stability coped with, copied with, coupled with drug use and a time where we really didn't know about this type of stuff. Like schizophrenia is something that's so common to us this day and age, but back in the 60s they were just sort of figuring out these types of mental diseases and really being able to like dissect and digest all of this stuff and figure out what to make of it. So to sort of see Brian Wilson's struggles so accurately portrayed, because he saw this film before it came out and he has commented on it and he said it was tough to watch because it was so close to home. Of course, it's all based on a true story. This isn't the documentary, this is the biopic. So I think you need to realize that they're going to play some stuff up and they're going to sort of, embellish on certain things because they have to sell a movie to you. But the fact that it felt so real and the fact that I just don't just watch this because I'm a massive Beach Boys fan. I watch this because I think it's such an interesting take and an interesting way to sort of tackle and show the severity of this illness that I haven't really seen represented much on screen. I think it's awesome for that. And also let's not forget that this was Paul Giamatti's movie, man. If there was ever a film where I thought he was just incredible in, and there's a few, dude, he was incredible in this movie. He played such an evil, menacing character, especially because he's a doctor. So the dichotomy of him being so evil was something that was so real to me. It was so real life, like, whoa, doctors can be bad people too. Really bad people. And I just think that this film has so many of those contrasts that really work for it. And when you cope it or copy it with, or couple it with, rather, I don't know why I keep doing that, but I'm very tired. When you couple this very melancholy, sad, eerie undertone with how happy and bright the Beach Boys music is, it's just like, dude, the contrast of this film might as well be a class in color correction because you just can't stop talking about it when you talk about this film. It's like an onion, man. There's so many layers, and every time I watch it, I get another layer from this movie, and every time I watch it, it kind of bumps a little higher up in my all-time favorite movies list. So, Love and Mercy, dude. It's an incredible film.
I remember you told me about this movie, and this is a movie that I'd heard a lot about. There were a couple movies in 2015 that, as many as I watched, I didn't get a chance to watch it. Like this movie, Beast of No Nation, which was Netflix's first original. This movie, 99 Homes, with Andrew Garfield and Michael Shannon. A couple of other movies that I wanted to, but never got a chance to get to. And this movie, the way that you talked about it, and from what I heard about it, like I still have to watch it, and I really, really do want to watch it. But so that's unfortunately why I can't contribute as much as I would like to. But I heard that this was like another step in the right direction in terms of the music biopics. And ironically enough, Paul Giamatti, also in the other big music biopic of this year, with Straight Outta Compton, playing NWA's manager, Jerry Heller. Exactly. So funny how that works. But so my number one, it's funny because this was a movie that was not originally in this spot. But the more and more I thought about it, both for this movie and the studio that made it, I was like, yeah, this is the best movie that I saw of this year. Now, I know a lot of people have Mad Max Fury Road in this spot. Notice how both of us do not have Mad Max Fury Road in our top 10 list. I enjoy that movie a lot, but like I said, well, that's a discussion for another time as of right now only because it's late. We're getting to the end of this podcast. But so the studio of A24, I think it's safe to say, is a studio that we have both become very, very fond of, specifically in recent years. And I could not have cheered harder when my favorite movie of 3 years ago now, Moonlight, in 2016, won Best Picture, rightfully so, over La La Land, and one of the greatest Oscar upsets I've ever seen. But before Moonlight, so A24, when we talked about this on our episode, had been established in 2013. But to me, the movie that officially put them on the map and finally started to get them noticed was a little sci-fi movie from a little director named Alex Garland called Ex Machina. My number one favorite movie that is turning 5 years old this year. When I saw this movie, it was really weird because the movie almost felt like a Black Mirror episode, but as a full-length movie. And I'm like, okay, what am I in for here? You know? And that's the brilliance of every single A24 movie. You never know what you're in for, and they always spin you on this crazy, weird, mysterious journey. Even if from like the most basic setting to like the most crazy bonker sci-fi setting. But by the end of the movie, you always understand where every one of the characters come from. And whether you agree with the catharsis or not, it feels cathartic. And we've seen, obviously, Ridley Scott, bringing it back to him, he obviously brought to the forefront the idea of tackling artificial intelligence and kind of how sometimes it can appear more human than human beings are and like what we prescribe humanity to. But this movie to me was almost like the spiritual successor to it, where you have this guy and he's interacting with this machine that he knows is a machine, but has so many humanistic qualities that he is literally fooled into thinking, oh yeah, I'm just talking to a human being. And even though the scientist who created her, the Oscar Isaac character, again, my introduction to Oscar Isaac before I ever saw Force Awakens, is the idea that, like, yeah, he comes off as like this cocky asshole and he seems like he's going to be like the typical like guy who's like enslaving this machine, even though he created her. But like, no, he has a reason for like keeping these machines, because obviously just because he feels more in tune with them, but also because he kind of understands the danger of what can happen. And even though you think that this guy played by Donald Gleason is being brought in for the Turing test in order to like test out these machines for rollout, what he's actually doing is like, it's almost like his own little psychological experiment in order to like see whether or not like he should like even allow himself to like create these machines. Like it's a brilliant exercise in just like humanity and what the idea of humanity is, And so, and the crazy thing is that by the time the movie ends, you've become so invested in this sprawling labyrinth that you didn't realize that who the movie was really about was the machine herself. And I'm going to use the term herself to prescribe to a machine. The character of Ava, portrayed in her debut performance, 2015 to me was the year of Alicia Vikander. And it sucks to me that she has not had like a tremendous breakout hit like that, a tremendous hit like this movie since then, because I almost feel like they gave her the Oscar for The Danish Girl as almost like a consolation prize for her not even getting recognition for this movie. Because oh my God, like I feel like any person who's a fan of sci-fi, any person who's a fan of filmmaking, any person who is just a fan of just like interesting ideas being presented should watch this movie. And Alex Garland, oh man, that's a guy, again, like there's a reason why I liked his movies. And I mentioned Danny Boyle a lot before, but it turns out that he wrote the script for both 28 Days Later and Sunshine, two incredibly inventive and very forward-moving sci-fi movies from the 2000s, both directed by Danny Boyle. Not to mention the fact that he basically took over and basically made my favorite alternative superhero movie / dystopic movie of this past decade, that being the remake of Dread. This guy was a superstar already to begin with, and for a directorial debut, this was one of the best directorial debuts I've ever seen. He went on to make one of my favorite sci-fi movies of 2 years ago, that being Annihilation, and he's got a new miniseries on FX right now and Hulu called Devs. Oh my God, this movie was unbelievable. It showed what A24 was capable of. It showed just like kind of, it was kind of, in a way, it was a great spiritual successor and a continuation of like our obsession with technology and like how we would go through it throughout the rest of this decade. It's my number one favorite movie of this decade. It's one of the best movies I've ever seen. It is definitely, I think, as time goes on, going to make itself more and more into my favorite movies of all time. It's my number one favorite movie that is turning 5 years old this year. It's Ex Machina.
I think I gotta get into this.
You gotta watch this movie. You're a sci-fi guy. You've seen Blade Runner 30 times. You gotta watch this movie, dude.
I think we each gotta watch each other's, because I want to know what you think about Love and Mercy, and I'm sure you know what I think about Ex Machina.
For real, dude. Yeah, this is a good list. I gotta say, so far, like I was not disappointed by a single one of your entries. I had a really fun
No,
time with this.
I think it was just overwhelming for me being the TV guy to when we decided this topic. We normally have a little more time to the side, and I was like, "Ooh, have I seen this many movies?" But then I didn't realize, like, all right, you've been hanging out with Dom for like almost 4 or 5 years now, so you've seen more movies than you think. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so then I started to get comfortable with it, and I was like, all right, let me dive in and see what I can say about these films. And I think this episode proved to me that like your filmography is growing, and you also, remember a little more than you thought. So aside from just having a blast and kind of remembering why I dislike certain films and why I really like certain films, I'm TV nerd's a little proud of himself right now. Enough to talk in third person and pat himself on the shoulder.
Yeah,
So
you did good. That's the thing. Like, I mean, I knew from the minute you told me, I'm like, look, with the amount of movies that Chris and I have talked about, like, I know he's seen more movies from this year that he's letting on, And like I said, I'll admit this is a little bit of a personal choice because I'm like, look, if we're going to do a ranking list and we can't do 2010, I want to at the very least do a year that is special to me for a lot of different reasons. And this year was a very special year for me. And it just so happened to be turning 5. And especially during all these times of doom and gloom, it definitely helped to look back on something in remembrance and joy.
Time.
Yeah, lighter time, but also a time when we could actually get some really, really good movies,
I get that, especially since we're getting 0 movies right now.
Zero movies right now. Like we were just, even if a movie's crap, we have to watch it because it's like, yeah, who knows when we're actually going to get a new movie.
Yeah, #lovebirds. But that is besides the point. Dom, speaking of watching movies, we have a few movie watches planned this month, don't we?
Yeah, we got a few things. We might have obviously this weekend is 4th of July, so we'll be taking a little bit of a break, spending time with our families, enjoying some good time during obviously this mess of a world that we're living in right now. Hope you guys will be doing the same. But the weekend after that, we've got and speaking of more anniversaries, we've got another anniversary coming up with Inception hitting its 10-year anniversary. So we hope you guys can join us for that Friday, July 10th at 9 p.m. And then 2 weeks after that, we've got another watch along. This one, again, is more of a personal choice, but Chris has been on a zombie kick lately. So I'm like, you know what? Why don't we both just watch a movie that we both love that is ultimately, to me, like the zombie movie that showed me that, like, oh, zombie movies can actually be really cool. So we will be doing 2 weeks after that, a Shaun of the Dead 16-year anniversary watch along. I want to say that. What?
What's the date on that?
I want to say it's July 24th, I think is the date. If you want to, if we want to quote me on that, I can check the calendar right now. But yeah, so we got those.
It is the 24th.
It is the 24th. Oh, yes.
I'm gonna leave July 10th up with Inception because
that's the big one that we want you guys to tune in for because we've been talking about influential films on a lot of this channel so far, and I think this one definitely goes for it. So. Yeah,
my next little prompt, I think, kind of is a reason to elaborate on this with all the cool stuff we have coming up,
Yeah.
You want to sort of let people know, like, why they should subscribe and turn the bell on, as if we already haven't given them a few reasons why. I know you always have some good ones, though, that I overlook.
Yeah, definitely. Well, I mean,
this is a late night podcast?
Are you like trying to get me to say something specific about something we got coming up, or you just want to let me go into my spiel?
What are you excited about?
I'm excited about a lot of things, Like I said, we're doing some comedy things, we're doing some Netflix things. Like I said, I know you like to just spoil everything and tell our audiences immediately, but I like to keep things a little bit ambiguous. We've been hinting heavily a lot that obviously 2 shows that we love from back in the day are back on Netflix, and we're eventually going to be hitting those. We should be hitting those by the end of the month. And we've got, like I said, we got a lot of different things coming down the pipeline that we're planning for you guys. Like I said, Chris mentioned a screenplay examination thing. We definitely have some fun things coming there. We've got a couple of debates that we've been hinting at very strongly that should be coming up soon. So yeah, all I'm going to say is, if you haven't hit the subscribe button yet, please do. Please leave a comment. Please turn on your notifications because we've got some fun content coming up. So if you guys enjoy watching us talk about movies and entertainment, then stay tuned. It's quarantine times.
It still is, unfortunately, but what I can say is, fortunately, that we are very much so still finding our voice, but we are, I think, moving at a great pace where we'll always have something to offer.
Absolutely. So with that being said, guys, thanks for tuning into this list. For our top 10 movies that are turning 5. It seems like a minuscule number, but when you see just the vast amount of movies that came out that year, it's always crazy to see. Thanks once again for showing up. Make sure you, again, click the like button, click the subscribe button, leave us a comment, please. Again, we are new creators on YouTube. Your feedback is invaluable to us. Your feedback right now is more valuable to us than physical money itself. Yeah, I'm gonna put it out there right now. I'm going there. I'm going there. I'm saying it because it's true. We really do value and depend on you guys. We're the Talkin TV channel. We're on YouTube. We're on Anchor. We still do exist in audio form. If you go over and listen to any place that you listen to podcasts, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, any place like that, give us a listen. It would be greatly appreciated. And also, if you want, we're on social media too. Facebook, Instagram. Just type in @TalkinTV or @TalkinTV Podcast. No G. Leave us a follow. We upload all of our notifications content right there. And as for personal plugs, I am the Movie Nerd reviews across all platforms. Chris, you got any personals that you want to plug?
No, this show is all I care about. So
makes sense.
You did a good job.
Chris has told me that a lot off air. That this is our baby, and yeah, we're gonna put our all into this because again, it's quarantine times, and what better way than to actually focus on doing what you love right now.
Yeah, Dom, I just kind of want you to tell people the new catchphrase, the new slogan.
The new slogan. Well, obviously, it's not the thing that we'll end it on, but people,
the Talkin. That's the sign off.
Yeah, the Talkin TV podcast. We're the halfway point between critics and commentators.
Yeah.
You'll have to leave us comments in the section. Very proud of it, but leave us some comments in the section. Again, it still needs a little bit of fine tuning, but I'm thinking it's going to stick. So, Chris, unless you have anything else that you want to add,
all I would say is that this was surprising. This went surprisingly well for it being such a late night podcast, and I wouldn't trade this episode for the world. This was a good chat.
Me neither.
We got to do that. What we do in the Shadows episode.
Yes, we do.
I would love to at a future date just dive deeper into the Big Short and let us know out of this list if there was anything that you want to hear more about from us on, because we will, this was a better year than I had felt going into it. So with that being said, Dom, is there a way you want to end the show here tonight?
Watch more fucking movies, people. We out.
We are